Senator Kennedy from Massachusetts. It's a name we've heard a few times before, but now rumor has it Congressman Joe Kennedy may be looking to add his name to the list. The congressman is reportedly considering a run against sitting Senator Ed Markey, who spent 37 years in the House before taking over John Kerry's old seat in 2013. Kennedy's team put an internal poll in the field to test the matchup, and Democratic operatives told the Boston Globe voters favored Kennedy by a small margin. A Kennedy-Markey race would be just the latest in a trend of entrenched Democratic incumbents in Massachusetts facing unexpected primary challenges, like Ayanna Pressley's upset win against 10-term Rep. Mike Capuano last year, and Congressman Seth Moulton's successful challenge to 9-term Congressman John Tierney in 2014. Right now, it's all winks and nods. Publicly, Kennedy says he is still planning to run for a 4th term in the House. Members of Senator Markey's team say he plans to run for re-election too, and today the Boston Globe obtained a video that shows a high-profile ally giving the incumbent her support.
Ed is my friend and my partner in the Senate. I've got his back, and I know that he will always have yours. Let's get Ed Markey reelected to the Senate.
Even though Kennedy was Warren's student at Harvard Law School and endorsed her presidential campaign earlier this year. So if JK3 does jump in, will his family name and record in the House be enough? Joining me are Stephanie Murray, the author of the POLITICO Massachusetts Playbook, Erin O'Brien, a professor of politics at UMass Boston, and Boston Globe columnist Scot Lehigh. Thank you all for being here. Stephanie, let's start with you. You were the first person to report on, I guess broadly speaking, Kennedy's possible candidacy. You had a scoop about this poll that he commissioned. How did you find out about that?
So I got a tip about the poll, and it actually took me a few days to report out because I didn't believe it myself. And
Why not?
It didn't seem like it was kind of in Kennedy's character or his game plan to be putting a poll in the field like this. And so folks who I were calling were saying, I don't know if that's a real thing. And then it turned out that it was, and there was all this speculation about who did the poll, and it turns out Kennedy did it himself.
He wouldn't confirm that to you, right? When you went to him for comment, they didn't initially say, yeah, we did this? Or
right, but sources have told the Globe that it really was him.
Yeah, and when we talk about it testing positive and negative messaging about the two candidates, are there any examples that spring to mind of, describe Joe Kennedy in a certain way positively or Ed Markey in a negative way?
The topics that the poll asked about were marijuana, the Green New Deal, and then kind of testing this generational matchup. Kennedy's a 38-year-old young congressman. Markey is in his 70s. He's been in Congress since 1976.
I like the idea of them using the words like young and vibrant and old and stuff. Not quite that heavy-handed, but nudging in that direction, right?
Sure.
Okay. Erin, if Kennedy does run, he will have to make, in some way, the case against Ed Markey. So put on your political consultant hat. What would the case against Ed Markey be?
Well, that's the big mystery of the run, right? It's not a policy lane for him. They're both progressives. Ed Markey's really good on the Green New Deal. He's really good on net neutrality. He's really good on oceans. And so the policy lane isn't there. I think it has to be that experience lane. But for Kennedy to make that argument, I think is a little bit harder. My read on this race is there's a logjam of talent amongst Massachusetts Democrats. You mentioned Ayanna Pressley, Maura Healey, Catherine Clark. Before the presidential run, Seth Moulton. I think this is Kennedy, who wants to run in that heavyweight primary. I think, if anything, he's trying to get ahead of a really difficult primary.
Can you just a little bit more dive into what might be parallels between, say, this hypothetical matchup and Pressley Capuano or Moulton Tierney? I mean, Tierney, it's always worth mentioning, his wife had this raft of serious legal problems. So what are the parallels and what are the divergences with this imaginary matchup?
Parallels are very easy. They're young. The divergences are many, right? Tierney had a corruption issue via his wife. Ayanna Pressley was an up-and-comer all along. She'd shown in Boston City Council she could win at large and win big. And she looks like the district she represents. Kennedy and Markey, beyond age, they look pretty similar.
Scott, do you agree with that assessment? I think I heard you talking about parallels and dissimilarities between Capuano, Pressley on the one hand, and this imaginary hypothetical race on the other.
I don't think that the Capuano race is a good template for this reason. Capuano has qualities that natural selection usually favors a porcupine, not a politician, not a real prickly, kind of a nasty guy.
I'm remembering the great story that your colleague Mike Resendiz wrote about Capuano's gubernatorial candidacy. Had the all-time best lead of any story I've ever read, which was then there was the time he threatened to kill the dog, right? Which grabs
so people kind of indifferent on him. And as you say, I think the district wanted a congressman that looked like the district. I think with Markey, he's a very well-liked guy. He's a little quirky. He's a little NRA, kind of the phrase-making. NRA should stand for not relevant anymore. And some people, I think, maybe wince a little at that. But he's a nice guy. He's got a much longer and better record than Kennedy does. He's been a leader on all kinds of progressive causes. I mean, there's no one nationally who's better on climate, better on fuel efficiency, better on the environment. So I don't see exactly what the rationale for Kennedy is, other than, look, it's time for a generational change and I'm impatient. And I have to say that kind of goes against his brand, which is, I'm the un-Kennedy Kennedy, kind of the Kennedy Uncola, the one who isn't entitled, who won't elbow his way in. So I think it's a little tougher than maybe the Kennedy camp thinks it is.
We should probably take a look at both of the people we're talking about here in action. First, we have some video of Ed Markey talking up the Green New Deal with his good friend Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So let's take a look at that first.
Never in our history have the interest of all Americans been so united on a single issue: climate change.
Climate change and our environmental challenges are one of the biggest existential threats to our way of life.
Is it fair to say that his ability to work on a very high-profile issue with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that undercuts the case that poll was trying to not so subtly make? Here's an old guy, past his prime. Here's a young, dynamic guy. Am I right about that, or am I wrong?
I think so.
Yeah, I think through the Green New Deal that he's generated a lot of goodwill among young progressive activists in the state who are Democrats who are going to vote in a September primary. And so I think that makes it a little tougher for Kennedy that they're seeing Markey as kind of the hero of climate change.
Mm-hmm. His only cardinal sin is he's kind of boring. Really. I mean, let's just call it what it is. I mean, he's good on policy for all the reasons you said. He's a leader on climate change. People came to him, and that's really, young people care a lot about that. So I think, listen, I think if Kennedy runs against him, he'll win. But I think in that campaign, there's not a natural reason beyond generational. And if you're a Kennedy, you're pretty advanced. How much newness are you bringing when you've been in politics? Right. The family's been in politics.
He maybe, I hear what you're saying about kind of boring, but he's also, we didn't really see it in that clip, but I have not seen any Democratic politician whip up a crowd at a rally the way I've seen people the way I've seen him whip up a crowd. And that includes Elizabeth Warren, who's very, very good in a retail political setting. It didn't come across in that bite, but I think he can. Like you talk about his weird quirks, the NRA means no longer or not relevant anymore. People kind of like that. Meanwhile, we have Joe Kennedy. Let's take a quick look at him giving the response to the last State of the Union speech from the president.
Politicians can be cheered for the promises they make. Our country will be judged by the promises we keep.
That bite captures something that has always struck me about Kennedy from the very beginning of his career. And you talked about not wanting to seem like, I don't remember if you used the word entitled, but an aggressive, assertive, I'm here to take what's mine,
right.
Kennedy. And I feel like he, in his public presentation, goes completely in the opposite direction to a point where he can almost seem somehow fragile when he's speaking, which I thought, I see you furrowing your brow, tell me I'm wrong, but I saw that in that clip. I see someone who doesn't look overly comfortable in front of the cameras. Am I wrong about that?
I think that's fair, but that was the biggest stage ever. I mean, that was, that was his first big moment that everybody nationally got to know him. I mean, all of us are in the Boston area. He's quite good one-on-one. He comes to UMass Boston with some frequency when he could be at Harvard all the time.
Oh, interesting.
So a lot of us like that.
What's he doing when he comes to UMass Boston?
He's done stuff he did a great forum with 4 members of Congress on bipartisanship. They were all younger, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and how they actually get along. So I think that's fair. I do think that was an awkward clip, but I don't think it was a representative clip.
Okay. What are his big claims to? Oh, you wanted to hop on that.
I think this is going to be a real test of substance too. I don't have a lot of issues that I associate Congressman Kennedy with. I associate him with sort of the standard Massachusetts delegation denunciation of the Trump administration. But if you were to say to me, where is young Joe Kennedy a leader and what substantively has he done, I'd have to say, I don't really know. I mean, and whereas Markey, I've been around for a long time, but I could list you half a dozen things where Ed Markey has passed important legislation or led an important fight or been a national figure on something. And I think that we will see how when I've talked to, I mean, basically my conversations with him have been in Ed board meetings with Kennedy, but it's always been what I call tweak speak. Well, we need to tweak this a little bit. Need to tweak it. Well, we'll tweak it. And it isn't really much of a substantive message. So I don't know.
I'd like to push back on that a little bit. The folks who started the group drafting Kennedy to run for Senate have been really impressed with the way he's led on LGBTQ issues, particularly for the transgender community. They were from his Boston Pride Parade committee, and so I think that's one issue where people see him leading.
Is that an area where they would point to legislative accomplishments or more the sort of using his seat to behave as an activist in the way that Ayanna Pressley promised to when she was running against Mike Capuano? Was it about legislation he's passed or stances he's taken publicly?
I think it's more about stances he's taken publicly, and I think that's going to be something that defines this race if he gets in, is whether people are looking for change, looking for a lawmaker who can go out there and kind of be that activist and that ally. But Markey's done the same on a lot of other issues, so it's going to be difficult for him to differentiate himself.
And I think that speaks to one of Kennedy's strengths, in that he can get a microphone nationally because of his name. Ed Markey is an insider policy guy, and he's quite adept. Democrats in Massachusetts love him for his legislative record. Joe Kennedy, to both your points, is more of using the bully pulpit, even though we're not talking about the presidency. He's outward-facing a little bit more and less legislatively focused, and those are, then Democrats have to say which is your preference.
I wonder, though. I wonder, I mean, to some degree, I think that the whole Kennedy thing is sort of run its course in terms of glamour and charisma. And now, I don't think he's one of those, but that part of the RFK family, the men in that sort of tend toward knuckleheadism, and they're always getting in different things. He's a nice kid, a nice guy.
The poll says when you see the names that he came out ahead.
I guess,
some of that's name.
Closing question. Were you guys surprised that Elizabeth Warren endorsement did in fact come out when it did? I had thought that maybe, I didn't know what was going on behind the scenes. You might, Stephanie. I had assumed that she was getting ready to endorse him when he had two other much lower profile candidates who didn't happen to be ex-pupils of hers talking about running against Markey. I didn't expect to see it, but the Globe put it up on your website today. Did that surprise you guys?
So I think what Warren said is that she endorsed him 6 or 7 months ago, and she was asked about this yesterday or the day before, and she said that Ed was a great partner to her in the Senate, and then there was a beat, and then she said that Joe was a great partner too, and that he's an amazing person. And I mean, take that with a grain of salt.
But this endorsement is new, right? This video that just came out, I mean, my understanding is it was taped late last week. So is she trying to have it both ways, saying that she's endorsing Markey without really...
What politician would do that?
That's very true.
My understanding, and I could be wrong, but that she had taped the video before, but the camps talked, and they said, is this still good? And she said, yes, it's still good. I'm with you. So that may turn out to be wrong, but I think it's right. I think it's if that is right, it's kind of a good, for them, it's a good boxed ear for Kennedy early on, I think, to say, hey, the highest profile, really one of the highest profile Democrats in the nation is with me, not you.
Question then, I guess, is what she does during the race. Does she come out and back in? If it happens, Scot Lehigh, Erin O'Brien, Stephanie Marie, thank you all.